I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar today on sustainable urban food systems, lessons from research on 4 cities from around Europe. And this is part of the SURFIT project, which you'll learn about today. You're going to hear from 4 different people and 4 different cities who are part of the SURFIT project, which is working on, as you can guess it, food systems and how we move towards more sustainable food systems. So just to give you a little bit of background, and this is a very, very short background. So I could talk here for probably 60, 90 minutes if I wanted to, but it's going to be in about 30 seconds. So one of the key challenges for sustainable urban food systems is to shorten the food supply chains. And this is about connecting food producers directly to consumers locally or regionally. So we know that this is a key way to make systems more sustainable. And so we'd like to welcome you all to this kind of interactive webinar to learn about key findings emerging from this project called the SURFIT project, which is a European project, and you'll learn much about that today, which is very much focused on scaling sustainable food networks, SFNs. And in this project, we're very much focused on the concept of catalyzers. So how do we kind of spark scaling and shape scaling? And how do we kind of jointly experiment with these catalyzers and learn about scaling processes for sustainable food networks? And our idea today is to give people kind of a glimpse into some of the things that we're up to in this project, and we're going to give kind of a perspective or a kind of a window into 4 different cities and 4 different publications that have been developed through this project or around this project. And the first is on transdisciplinary approaches from the Maastricht team. This kind of leads into prefigurative politics, which is both very closely connected, from the Malmö team, into participatory governance from Krakow, and then finishing off with food democracy from Trento. So we're going to finish with a bit of a bang. There's quite a lot of challenging questions through these presentations, and certainly points where we kind of need to really discuss, yep, there are some things that would need to significantly change in our food systems for them to be more sustainable. So as we go, please use the chat function, write into the chat any questions, any comments, and we'll answer them as we go. And then at the end, we'll have kind of a moderated discussion with all 4 of our presenters. So each of our presenters has 7 to 8 minutes. Good luck. This is very hard to present lots of ideas and thoughts in such a short time. But we're going to kick off with our first presentation. Dagmar, I'll let you introduce yourself and I will click through the slides. The first slide is just the blank canvas, is transdisciplinary approaches, and a paper that you've worked on with colleagues. So just tell me when to click through the slides and let's go. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kes. And welcome everybody to our webinar. I could see now during the introduction that a great number of people have joined us this morning for our webinar. I'm very pleased to hear or see this. So Kes, would you please go into my first slide? No, you don't have very much the introduction with the title?
That was the first one, which has changed with the formatting. So now
I see.
This is your first one. So you're
okay. So the topic that I'm going to discuss here is based on our first year of research here in Maastricht, and it's to understand the transdisciplinary approach in prefigurative experimentations. And one of the key issues of what we realized was the missing link, and that is what I'm going to discuss here, is the missing link was to create collective learning processes. The paper already has been published and can be also already has been published this year in the spring, and it's an open access format. So what is prefiguration? Could you please go to the first slide? Prefiguration is the analysis of organizational practices of social movements. Could you please click? Yes. And the interpretation of this definition is that there are 2 different interpretations. One is leading by examples, and the second interpretation is building counter structures. What we have done here in Maastricht is putting those two interpretations together and channel them into cycles of experimentation, but also to learn collectively around transformative change. Could you please go to the next slide? So the question then here becomes, how does prefiguration contribute to long-term societal changes? And the argument, can you click? And the argument here is prefigurate experiments must be connected to collective learning processes. So how did we do this in Maastricht? Is by using urban living labs. Urban living labs is a methodological framework for testing real-life experiments, but also to discuss collectively what needs to be actually changed. Could you go to the next slide? That is here in 3 steps. It was in system, target, and transformation. First, stakeholders that we reached out to here in Maastricht, coming from different, already engaged in different kind of food system changes, have discussed what is actually the problem with the food system, but importantly, what kind of impact that dominant food system made on their real life changes. Because you understand here that we would like to create a bottom-up process to transform the food system. And therefore, the participants of the living lab, which was coming from various situations, discussed together how do we actually create an experiment that brings out a transformative change. Can you go to the next slide? Together, they have come up with a learning agenda, but also importantly here is, in an urban living lab, is to create a common premise. It is to understand that it is a collective force here to transform the food system. For us, it was important to overcome the individual way of tackling the food system by itself, rather than to create a common base, and that was through a collective learning agenda. Can you go to the next? Here, once they identified the experiments, it was not only that you can do an experiment in one dimension, but actually what is necessary is that the experiments that they identified how to do it needs to be done in different dimensions, need to be tackled. It is not only possible to understand, yes, we would like to change, for example, a consumer behavior without actually increasing production. If we would like to put the food system on a regional level, then we need to understand what kind of dimensions need to be changed on a regional food systems. Can you please click? And what came out here is, across all 4 cities, is to overcome structural barriers on the regional level. That is around market, finance, policy, and also in the society about behavior. Because interestingly, across all 4 cities, we understand that there's a loss of farmers' knowledge, but also a loss of food knowledge in general, around cooking, around processing, and around understanding actually what kind of food is being grown locally at the right time. So here the stakeholders have created then an experiment around these challenges. How do we overcome that? How do we overcome 4 dimensions in one experiment? And that posed actually a really great challenge on this. And here in Maastricht, what they have decided to do is to do a festival. The challenge in an experiment is also to understand how do we that the experiment has to be short term rather than long term, because also they're given to the nature of the experiment itself, of the project itself. So there needs to be some kind of a distinctions. And therefore, there was an emphasis on making a festival, which we actually just concluded last week. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yes. So can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Here. And we understand here the experiments that we have here undertaken around food, which precisely was around bread. It brought together the producers, the bakers, and the consumers across all those three dimensions, but not only in Maastricht, but also here within the region, because we understand that we are not only going to change the food system on an urban level, but we also need to change it within the countryside, within a regional economy. And therefore, it was brought together across the region here. We understand that the experiments that we undertook is a disruptor rather than being already going into a long-term transformative change. And what we are now entering now here in that phase is to do a common evaluation around the festival, but also and what kind of impact it had already within the society. And this is our next step. Okay. Here we understand and also that building on this, then through the collective learning processes, how do we can improve this, reaching out to the common society. We understand now that it is not just on one level of transformative change, but on multiple changes, and therefore the continuous learning or reflection is necessary, but also through this common learning, we can actually build and expand our network then slowly and on a grassroots level. Thank you.
Fantastic, Dagmar. Yeah, look, we're like I said, please use the chat function as we go. Write comments or questions in there as we go. Look, Dagmar, it's a great opening. You also gave us an introduction to all the different cases, but the kind of loss of knowledge discussions, really interesting, and kind of experimentation as disruptors. We're going to come into that again. So we're going to move on. We're going to do these 4 kind of presentations, and then we'll open up for kind of a more moderated discussion. But we're going to go from Maastricht in the Netherlands to Malmö in Sweden. So over to you, Sebastian. Prefigurative politics. What's all this about?
Thank you very much, Kes, and also thanks everyone for joining today. And thank you, Dagmar, for the invigorating introduction to the SURFIT project. We will continue with prefiguration here, but first I just want to introduce me shortly. My name is Sebastian, and I have a background in anthropology, and I'm now pursuing my PhD at the Swedish University for Agricultural Sciences in Sweden. Yeah, this paper that we have developed here in Malmö team, it builds on this idea that Dagmar presented with prefiguration as a key aspect of grassroots support, essentially. And the paper will also be presented at a conference next week in Montpellier, and then eventually it's currently going through peer review. So it will be made publicly available and open access as well. Next slide, please. Right, so let's start with a more broader definition. Prefigurative politics is essentially politics in its most basic sense. It seeks to actualize a vision of collective life. It's forward-looking and very activated in the present, and it uses imagination while reconfiguring lived social relations and exercise of power. And generally, prefigurative politics have been a theory used to explain social movements, predominantly left-wing social movements, but in the context of the food system transformation, we're asking the question if municipal actors can engage in prefigurative politics to promote a sustainable food transformation locally. Next slide, please. The context, broadly speaking, from Malmö is that municipalities are vital drivers of sustainable urban development, balancing national policy implementation with support for local initiatives. This is essentially connecting back to the bottom-up approach that Dagmar was talking about before, but also highlighting that municipalities also have this role of implementing policy locally, essentially. And by experimenting with collaborative governance and legitimizing local action, municipalities can help scale sustainable food initiatives for lasting impact. And we believe that prefiguration may be a tool to this end. We have deployed ethnography, specifically multi-sited ethnography, because the foodscape in any city is obviously based on multiple locations. So it's important to bring all those in to the field work. I personally was in the field between January and November 2025, and it's a continuous process, but the data we're basing this on is from that period. The most key methodological aspect is probably participant observation. For those of you who are not familiar with this, it essentially means immersing oneself in the field where the relevant actors engage in these questions and partly participate in the activities and also observe from some sort of research point of view. In this case, for SURFIT, we have developed the urban living labs, which is part of the experimentation aspect that Dagmar introduced. But I've also been part of organizational planning meetings and workshops by local initiatives and municipal actors, such as the Agroecology Europe Forum last year. And then I've conducted semi-structured interviews with institutional actors, producers, and activists. Next slide, please. Right, so in order to identify whether or not prefigurative politics can be meaningfully employed to describe a case, we have used the framework developed by Jeffrey and Dyson in 2021, which has also been utilized by Rutten Davis in 2024 to understand prefiguration within food sharing initiatives in Ireland during COVID-19. And they go through three kind of dimensions or interlinked processes, which they term improvisation, which is not so much the improvisation you might know from theater, but rather a strategic use of testing solutions and enrolling whatever materials are available to prefigure the outcomes desired or the intended results, so to speak. Hopefully this leads to some form of institutionalization, which is here described as processes that strengthen individual, collective, and societal resources for participation and establishment of cross-sectorial and cross-regional collaborative ties. This should lead to impact in the form of being intimately related to impacts that these ties are strengthened through and embedding skills and knowledges in existing structures and institutions. Next slide, please. Right, so through our data analysis, we identified three municipal activities that could be conceptualized as versions of prefigurative politics, and they are lowering the climate impact of food in public procurement, creating a food policy council, and scaling the transition to a sustainable local food system. However, in the interest of time, I think we focus on the middle one, creating a food council, which was also mentioned by Dagmar previously. Essentially, the improvisation aspect here is seen through the attempt of municipal actors a few years back, almost 6-7 years now, looking at the potential of creating a food policy council in Malmö, taking inspiration from, for example, Bristol's policy council. And this led to various workshops and integrations of networking and disseminations on, for example, food democracy. Then they received funding, which after COVID-19 essentially led to the institutionalization and establishment of Malmö Food Council, and of particular interest to SURFIT. I would say that the formalizing of the council into a not-for-profit or like an NGO facilitated these kind of collaborations that makes the council a unique example for us to look into further. And it also provided further autonomous aspects of the council itself, not having to be embedded in the municipality. And the impact comes in strengthening the food sustainability focus of the city, facilitating action on food-related issues by relevant experts and stakeholders. Next slide, please. And what we learned is that essentially municipalities can be key supporters of grassroots initiatives, and prefigurative politics can actually act to minimize the risk of co-optation, for example, by supporting an autonomous entity like Malmö Food Council. And municipalities can also operate between top-down and bottom-up processes, which means that prefigurative politics effectively maintains the community-anchored approach by the municipality in these translation activities between policy and local actors. And yeah, then governance mechanisms impact local initiative scalability. We'll hear more about this as it relates to food democracy by Francesca, I believe. So I will wrap up now by saying that prefigurative politics can anchor the food system transformation in local governance. Thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic, Sebastian. If there was an audience, they'd be cheering now and clapping. I love prefigurative politics. I think it just leads on really nicely from Dagmar's presentation. I think it gives a concept to, I think, what many of us have worked with over time, this idea of, imagining futures but creating them today. We're going to move on. Dagmar, I see your hands up, but we're going to do questions later. Not yet. We're going to now move from Sweden to Poland to Krakow. And we're going to kind of move into this topic of participatory governance, which again is kind of an underlying feature, I think, in prefigurative politics and also what Dagmar talked about. So over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Dzień dobry. I will present our case, so research conducted together with my colleague Ewa Kopczyńska. And we focused here, as you said, on participatory governance. What we did, we looked at community-led dialogue around local food markets, and we asked ourselves what happens when different actors come together. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide. Another one. Thanks. So why Krakow? Krakow is interesting because it does not yet have a fully institutionalized urban food policy system. However, food-related initiatives, local markets, municipal interest are growing. So it's a quite good case for studying how participatory governance can emerge before formal food policy structures are fully developed. And our main questions here were what priorities emerge from stakeholder discussions, and how do different groups understand these priorities? Next, please. So our approach was based on participatory dialogue. As I said, we worked with different groups, included producers, market organizers, municipal actors, public institutions, NGOs, and researchers. These meetings, as you see here on the pictures, were created as a space where different actors could name problems, compare priorities, discuss possible solutions. So in total, for 3 meetings, we had 48 unique participants. And we analyzed the recorded discussions, transcripts, and field notes using as a method the framework analysis. And this gave us in total 316 coded quotations, which we grouped into 6 thematic frames. And we go to the next slide. And here you see on the left side our 6 frames. And our main finding is actually that stakeholders did not produce one simple solution, but instead they produced a map of connected issues. So these 6 priorities which emerged were infrastructure, governance, awareness, economic viability, promotion, and quality and trust. But what is especially important for us in the results is the stakeholder pattern. Because as you see here, the municipal actors focus more on infrastructure, planning rules, coordination. So here we see the quotation, who is responsible and what can the city actually do? Market organizers emphasize everyday market practice, promotion, trust, and community building. Producers focused on costs, fees, certification, economic survival. For them, local participation has to make economic sense. While NGOs and researchers highlighted awareness, inclusion, evidence, and links between everyday practice and long-term strategy. So the composition of the Living Lab matters. Who is at the table shapes what becomes visible as a problem and what becomes possible as a solution. Next slide, please. And we would end with 4 main messages. So the first message is that composition matters. So a Living Lab is not only a consultation group. Who is invited shapes the topics and the discussion. Second key message is that diversity is useful. So the goal is not to force one shared diagnosis, but to make different perspectives and which can be used for policy learning. Third key message is that the coordination is the bottleneck. So actually the food system work requires links between planning, environment, entrepreneurship, education, and market management. And fourth, follow-up is crucial. So dialogue creates insight, but change also needs resources, institutional anchoring, and political commitment. So the main takeaway here is this. So participation should not erase diversity. It should make different perspectives useful for building more realistic and inclusive food policy. And I would like to leave 3 questions for the discussion. First question, is the stakeholder pattern specific to Krakow or more general across the SURFIT cities? Second, how does Living Lab composition shape the problems and solutions that emerge? And third, who needs to be at the table to be that food policy is realistic and inclusive? Thank you very much from our side.
Fantastic. I mean, look, thank you for this presentation. And I think like this is a great, kind of in-depth both use and analysis of Living Labs. And I think this key question of participation. These questions you're asking, a fantastic group of questions here. I think this actually leads us really nicely into our next presentation, because I think these questions start to raise, will bring us into the politics also and the power relationships. And if who's at the table shapes the kinds of problems and solutions that we're working on, it absolutely does. So thank you so much. We're going to move to our final location. To Italy. Where would you go if you wanted to talk about food? It would definitely be Italy, but more than just great food, but also this topic of food democracy, such an important topic. And our next speaker, Francesca, is definitely in this space working on this topic a lot. And I think this is going to kind of round up our presentations here today. So now we're going to Trento in Italy, and over to you, Francesca. Food democracy.
Yes.
Thank you, Cass. Hello, everybody. Well, I'm Francesca, and also this is what I'm presenting is something that is supposed to come out in a book that is titled Justice-Centric Urban Food Transformation. And I think that we all own this idea to talk about food democracy in relationship with food justice, thanks to the editors of this book that pose us interesting question. I just want to say that our team in Italy is really transdisciplinary. This paper is written with Mattia Andreola, who is a researcher in my science department, and Gaia Maronilli, who is instead working at the municipality, because the SURFIT project gave us the possibility to, gave the municipality of Trento the possibility to employ a person dedicated to develop the food policy in the city of Trento. But what I will talk about, what we have prepared for today, is a little bit of a provocation about food democracy. Cass, can you go on the second slide? What we have just listened through all the three presentations is actually a component, very important component of what in the literature is called, is referred as food democracy. Food democracy, what is it? The definition is emphasizing predominantly participation, deliberation. I could also now add also prefiguration, and the capacity to citizen to influence food system decision. But the editor of the book that ask us to reflect on the concept of the food democracy, help us to think something very critical. Is this enough? Is participation is enough? Because if we look inside the participation of these, I believe that this is something that we can recognize in all these participatory tables. There is this possibility to elite capture, that this table mobilize the one already mobilized. So is this democracy? Or is this democracy just? When food democracy is reduced to participation and deliberation, it often, in fact, confuses having a seat at the table with having power to change the menu, or assumes that inviting stakeholders automatically produce inclusive outcome, or overlooks how existing power asymmetries reduce and cultural capital shape who can participate meaningful. So what are we doing with food democracy and with this concept? So the next one. So looking at these two different debates, one around food democracy and one about food justice, we discovered that authors are different, and these are the two different streams of literature, that they don't intersect. But what we believe, because we have used also the idea to write in this paper all together, I mean, with my municipality employee and the researchers, also to develop our thought in the transdisciplinary way. So food democracy, if we look at the debate, is related to participation, deliberation, and formal inclusion. We have just heard about that. Food justice instead highlights something very important: redistribution, reconnection, and structural transformation. So this, our key argument in this paper is democracy without justice risk to be just symbolic, a space that manages dissents rather than transform power relations. This is the contested link we explore through Nutrire Trento. Nutrire Trento is not, go on the next one. Nutrire Trento has not started with SURFIT. Is a process that especially Mattia and I have been observed for a long time. Through participatory observation since 2017, semi-structured interview, document analysis, and transdisciplinary approach, thanks to SURFIT. And SURFIT give us the new A's to approach, thanks to the SURFIT team, to approach these processes that we have been analyzing. Because Trento is supposed to be a very rich area in Italy, but we have seen lots of food poverty emerge. That is the testimony of this is the spread of this food bank as an example of Trentino Solidali that deliver food to people that are in need. Go next one, Cass. This is quite important because Nutrire Trento and the new eyes that we had through SURFIT help us to write a compass of 6 different tensions. This compass, I think that it could be reutilized also when we look at similar processes like Food Policy Council. These tensions are 6. The first, for example, highlight participation versus power. Many boys were at the table in Nutrire Trento, are at the table, but some carried more weight than others. The second is deliberation versus decision. There was plenty of discussion. There is plenty of discussion in this round table, but translating discussion, we heard about it, into concrete decision is difficult. Inclusion versus representation. Who was actually in the room? Who was in need of food or people already organized? Short-term wins versus long-term transformation. Quick wins are important for momentum, but they can also substitute a deeper structural change. This change needs time. Fifth, institutional support versus civic autonomy. Collaboration with the municipality brought resources, but also constraints. We might discover this also in the Malmö case. And the sixth one, the local versus the systemic. A local food policy is valuable, but it cannot solve problems that are produced at the national and global level, as Dagmar put it very clearly in the first talk of this webinar. So, last slide. What we learn, because SURFIT is here for make us more critical and for allow us to learn something different that we knew before. Well, we learn, working on food democracy for a long time, that food democracy is not enough. Democracy without justice risks being symbolic, as I just said. Participation without redistribution of power, rebalancing risk, reproducing inequality. Justice without democracy risks being technocratic or paternalistic. Top-down policies that lack civic empowerment struggle to produce meaningful change. What is the challenge? Integrating the two. Food democracy and food justice, stable institution and finance backing. We need this. Provocative inclusion strategy, proactive inclusion strategy, that is prefiguration actually, no? Mechanism that give way to collective decision and balancing temporality, quick win versus low trust building. That's the conclusion. Food democracy and food justice are not competing projects, they are complementary imperatives. And thank you for listening.
Fantastic, Francesca. I think we definitely finished on a bang. I think now you're really coming into these issues of, well, like you've just talked about. I mean, the relevance of justice and equality to our food systems is absolutely pivotal if we want to move towards something which resembles sustainable food systems. I'm going to now stop sharing so I can actually see the rest of the audience. I'd just like to thank kind of all of our speakers for those presentations. It's sometimes funny when you're in a project and then you get to hear everyone present one after the other. I'm really quite impressed with this work, and the interconnections between the work is also really interesting. We now have an audience here, people that have joined us to listen and so on. You are very welcome to write a question in the chat or even raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. And we'll get things going now because the floor's open. And I'm going to go to Julia, one of our colleagues in the SURFIT project, who's already got a question, which is fantastic. Julia, you can start us off. Let's go.
Thank you so much, and thank you for a very insightful presentation. Really exciting to see all the research that has been going on. I have been, yes, I'm a colleague in the SURFIT project, associate professor in sustainable development at Lund University. And I have been working in the past years quite a lot with co-governance or collaborative governance in urban settings. So where we discuss that we need to engage state and non-state actors in governing together the sustainable urban transformations. And here we also have seen through the presentations that the a very common narrative is that, yes, indeed, because we have such complex problems, the food systems need transformation, we need everyone on board, we need collaboration, we need different actors brought together and work together through participatory governance, collaborative governance, co-governance, whatever we call it, transdisciplinary approaches, live-in labs. All of this involves basically a bunch of actors working together. And I would like actually to challenge a little bit here our speakers and ask you whether it is always good. Do we always need collaboration, or are we kind of losing time with collaboration and resources and come into lots of challenges and barriers, and we can't really move on and transform our urban food system? So maybe Francesca started talking a little bit from a more critical perspective, I think, here on kind of also downsides of collaborative governance, collaboration, participation. But maybe each of you can think of what, in your cases, you find the biggest strength and the biggest weakness of collaborative approaches. Yeah, that would be really great if each of you can say one strength, one weakness. You can repeat each other, I think.
Great question. So, should we start with Dagmar? Dagmar, do we always want to collaborate, or where are the strengths and weaknesses in collaboration? Any thoughts, Dagmar?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is a very valid question. And interestingly, while we were doing now this experimentation, or even like trying to translate that experimentation into practice, a lot of tensions actually has surfaced. And so it is not something about, like, oh, people are waiting to work actually collaboratively together. It is not the case. And it's highlighted that people are also find this very challenging in one way or another. For example, there was a challenge by this one baker who felt economically threatened by inviting other bakers and producers around, and he was adamantly saying, no, you cannot do this event in my space, you know, even though it was not it was not to take anything away from him, but it was but he blatantly said no, he does not want to participate because he felt an economic threat. At the same time, as a strength in our experimentation, we developed a very strong network here around producers and consumers, and also with the municipality, which previously was not the case. Because the municipality in Maastricht had the standpoint the citizens have to move before they participate into something. They did not want to impose something onto the citizens. And so once the citizens started moving in the direction of implementing the experiments, then they also started moving by supporting them financially, for example, or creating other resources for them.
Great point. Over to you, Sebastian.
Yeah, great questions, Julia. We kind of wish we had more time to go through them. But yeah, to just start off with what came to mind spontaneously, unfortunately, that's the weaknesses. When we organized our living lab, it became quite clear that there's a tendency for the same people to come to these things as always, and you have to ask yourself, how can you make it more available to people? But a single mother cannot show up daytime to a 4-hour seminar, you know, to just discuss a potential solution to a daily problem for this individual, as one example. And these kind of questions are hard to realize in some sort of tangible difference to how we design these approaches. But I do think we need to keep in mind that any type of resistance is by default a messy process, and collaboration and participation does show some sort of promise and has the potential to both aid in meaningful scaling, but also to find new avenues for example, funding and those kind of support systems. So just because it's messy and might not be 100% perfect, I think we're increasingly improving on the ability to do it.
Good points. We have several of our collaborators in the in this webinar as well from Malmö, which is great to see. And I think that there is a fantastic levels of collaboration across these cities and in these kind of food systems. But this question of when does collaboration lead us in a direction we want to go is still a really good one. So I'm going to finish off with Alexandra and Francesca. Would you also like to reply on this, the collaboration question? Alexandra
Yes.
first.
So yeah, I believe that the diversity, when we like see diversity as a value, that this is let's say the key to get the most out of it. So I believe that the coordination part is crucial, is very important. That also the part which organize, which also like leads the let's say discussions, that he or she is also a knowledge breaker, so that it's a matter of be aware that the different parties are coming with different priorities, different knowledge also, and to make this knowledge important for the discussion for everyone and also understandable, because sometimes we see that there are different priorities, different knowledge, but also different stakeholder groups have different communication styles. So also they need different support to understand also what is going on for the other stakeholder group, and what do they need to make this knowledge useful on their side. So I believe this coordination part is very crucial.
Yeah, really good point. Francesca.
Yes, just quickly, we always say that, I mean, usually we think about, I mean, the literature hope to solve sustainable problem with technical fix. And we believe, we are sociology, that we need social fixes, because sustainability is not reachable without a change in the practices, in people practices, how we deal with matter. For example, within the SURFIT, we have worked a lot with these different forms of scaling. And we have to remember the scaling deep is very important, because we have to think about food, for example, in a different way, not a commodity, but a right. So you need to coordinate the thoughts and the action of many different actors. So I think that collaboration is a problem, because is against individualized society, the society we live in, but is what all this experiment needs to try to achieve if we want to pass to a more sustainable system, food system, but general society system.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, for me, I'll just make a comment as well. I mean, I think this question of collaboration, I think, raises also this tension between engagement and expertise. We're putting a big focus now on kind of the engagement focus to try to bring in all these actors, and then it raises questions of missing and marginalized actors. It raises questions of power relationships and who has the power. But there's also this other question, when we push towards engagement, sometimes we push away the expertise element. And here I'm talking about expertise to advise on, well, how do you actually create sustainable food systems, and who actually holds this expertise and experience to shape policy making and decision making in certain directions. We're essentially leaving this up to markets at the moment. And I suppose if no one else has a question, I'm going to jump in and ask a question. For me, the biggest elephant in the room, and perhaps it's not an elephant in the room, but it's certainly a big elephant, we can all see it, is the power of some organisations and actors in the food system, which Francesca obviously got to, supermarkets being one of them. They're able to kind of control the food system in a way which is probably quite unhealthy. But often they are kind of periphery to these conversations and not really engaging in these types of events. I don't see any major supermarkets attending our webinar here. They show a bit of interest in things, but their power over the food system is just immense. Certainly in European countries where we're all from, in Sweden and so on, essentially you're buying all your food through these major food market chains. So my question to the speakers then is essentially, I mean, we're talking lots about experimentation, lots about these different concepts we're putting forwards and living labs and so on. But what other ways do we need to kind of confront this type of unbalance in the power relationships in the food systems, and in particular supermarkets? Do we try to bring them in? Do we try to demonize them? Do we try to do a little bit of both? But how do we kind of engage with these types of actors, which are really just shaping our food systems? And here as well, just to point out, I mean, supermarkets are also a fantastic innovation. I mean, who would have thought you could walk into a store and find every possible food from the whole planet in that store pretty much all the time? Has its drawbacks, but it is a pretty incredible innovation. So we've also got that element that they are something which people think are pretty fantastic. So that's a pretty tough question. Anyone want to jump on that one? Any thoughts on how we engage with these kinds of powerful actors like supermarkets to be moving towards more sustainable food systems? I'm going to throw it over to... Yeah, go for it, Sebastian. What do you reckon?
I can just jump in. Well, first of all, I think it's a great question, Kes. How to approach the powerful entities that make such a huge impact on all of our lives. I would say that from the SURFIT research perspective, that there are plenty of conditions that we can play around with already. It doesn't always have to be about completely novel technologies or approaches of this kind of reconfiguration model. I do believe that, for example, in Sweden, we see huge potential for public procurement to become increasingly better across the nation, where municipalities will be able to increase organic purchasing. And it's also a popular model in Europe in general to look at Sweden. So to further improve it may show that potential in canteens and so on through Europe. But then I also think it's important that we look at not as an opposition to innovation, to also talk more about exnovation and how we actually get rid of things and practices and institutions that are no longer serving its purpose or is heading in the wrong direction. So that's what I wanted to add.
Fantastic point, Sebastian. I love it. Over to you, Dagmar. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Kes. It's a very valid question. But since the supermarkets, it seems it's the only way how do we actually get our food is only through supermarkets. So what we yes, it is a fantastic way to go shopping there and get the food, but at the same time, you know, I mean, the problem what we have here is that at least what we have known here from our producers is that even if they would like to supply the supermarkets, it is not possible for local food producers because it's about the homogenization of the products. It's also how it has been configured. The structure itself is really fantastic, but how, on what kind of premise, on what kind of economic premise or ecological premise it is, I think this is a major problem. And there has, I mean, we talked also about, you mentioned also about the, the point is whether we can actually use it in the food transformation. And the previous organic movement between the 1960s and 2000s, they actually jumped on that because with the organic labeling system, because they thought, fantastic, we can actually now use the supermarkets to increase our market share around organic food systems. And so the European Union introduced the organic labeling system in 2002. But now, as we know, that also now has huge problems because the premise itself, the ecological and the economic premise, is not within an organic production framework, but is based on a framework that supports unlimited productivity. And that is counterproductive when we are looking into organic food production, because organic food production itself is not based on unlimited productivity, which the supply chains are based on. And I think, therefore, that it is incompatible from an economic framework. The economic framework just simply don't fit. And also, I mean, as you said, I mean, we can have the diversity, but what kind of diversity? Do we want global, local diversity, or do we want to have global regional diversity? Which means that we also need to have some form of flexible access to the food system.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think these points of these contradictions or enormous tensions that exist between what we have and the systems that are in place and kind of what we need to get towards if we want to be more sustainable and more circular is quite apparent. Eva, do you want to jump in and offer some comments?
Yeah, that's just, it's, you know, your question inspired me to thinking about the participation and the power imbalances within the living lab process, because we usually think about the process of inviting the non-represented actor as a matter of, let's say, moral or justice value, because they are not heard. We are, you know, obliged to give them the space, but putting that aside, inviting the powerful actors make an impact. I mean, this is, if we want to scale, if we want to go out of the niche, we need to have everyone on the board. Yeah, and I understand that it's ambivalent from the you know, moral political perspective, to give them even more power and space. But, you know, being pragmatic, maybe we should more we should look more into collaborative process as a tool. I can see some comments in the chat, people referring to the outcome of the process rather than the process itself. Yeah, so when we are researching, when we are studying the so-called alternative food networks, we like to look at the niche ones. But what about the ones that are alternative, but within the system, in a sense, if you know what I mean? The solutions, the experiments on how to collaborate with big powerful actors. Yeah, so that would be interesting to look into that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think this element of how to collaborate, but also how to form coalitions of various organizations that might not normally work together, but might be able to find some points of agreement and points where they can collaborate in different ways. Mattia, do you want to jump in?
Yes, please. Yeah, because I'm going to step away from this specific focus for a moment of the supermarkets, but apparently at least, but I hope to catch a connection with what Eva just said, because what we actually have seen multiple times in this territory and in general, on the one hand, is the competition that arises among alternative processes and initiatives, which tend to focus to cultivating, sorry for this misuse of the term, their own niche rather than bringing about truly transformative change. And in order to survive, they adopt like characteristics that are typical of the conventional industrial supply chain. And in this way, they take oxygen away from the real transformative initiatives. But at the same time, on the other hand, there is this mutual permeability. This is also the case of alternative food networks or initiatives that manage to exploit opportunities to hybridize supermarkets, because there is a demand that is growing in the consumers. And both supermarkets wants to occupy these new niches, and at the same time there are these local initiatives that find a way through the supermarkets. This is the case of one of the initiatives that we explored specifically here in Trento, and Guy and Francesca did the interviews. So I mean, that's what we have seen also.
Yeah, look, it's a really important reflection. I think there's so much, I think, that in these types of projects as well that we learn from working in these very specific contexts as well, kind of place-based research, where we're starting to explore what's actually happening on the ground in specific parts of Europe and so on. I think it really helps us to better understand these kind of change processes and transformations. And like you said, the way these kinds of organizations work in these spaces. We're getting very close to the end of this webinar, and I think a key characteristic of a good webinar is to finish on time. So we have like 1 minute to go. And I thought I might just throw back to our speakers, but this is very quick. I'm going to ask each of our speakers one thing they'd like people to remember from their presentation or from this webinar. So, Dagmar, one thing. What do you want people to remember, or what do you want people to take from this webinar? And being on mute will be problematic because then we won't hear the great idea. So we're definitely on. There we go.
Okay. The learning process around experimentation is a collective process.
Woo, that was good. You've set the standard now. Let's go. Sebastian, one thing.
Oh God, that's really hard to top. That's really good. Well, I guess I would just say that I do still believe in collaboration. So municipal actors are a great asset in this collaborative effort.
Very good. We haven't given up on collaboration yet. Alexandra, what would you like to say?
Maybe it matters who you invite, so that the structure of the participants shape the discussion.
Great point. And we finish off, Francesca, lucky last.
Food is a right for all, and not good food is not a privilege.
That's
Brilliant.
great.
I'd like to thank, well, first all our speakers for presenting and for giving their thoughts and the questions now, both in the chat and people raising their hands and asking questions. Thanks so much for the people joining this webinar. It's always fun to have a small group to listen and discuss with. If you'd like to find out more about our project, you can find us on LinkedIn. We're on all of our websites. Thank you so much to WWF, Aaron and Erica for organising this webinar. This was our kind of test run, pilot run, see how it went. It went beautifully, Aaron. Well done. And we're going to do some more kind of open webinars after the summer. So thanks so much for joining. Have a great day.